Story 1. People who don't accept new information that disproves their initial theory on a concept.
Yeah, but still is your sign to quit. They're beyond help.
That's what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. People will become even more fanatical in their beliefs, even after being shown cold, hard facts that they are wrong.
I have a difficult time accepting the correct answer to the Monty Hall problem.
Story 2. When you give someone a genuine fact, and they argue tooth and nail that their opinion is the only correct thing, and that opinion overrides the fact.
And they tell a doctor to do your own research, for fuck's sake. So a doctor who studied research papers at a university, let's say, attended lectures, and did practical studies for 10 to 12 years knows less than you're made on a Facebook short?
Nah. I've met highly educated people who were completely impervious to facts that disagreed with their beliefs. In general, you can't use logic to change someone's opinion that they didn't arrive at using logic.
I know someone who has the mindset of, your fact doesn't back up my point, so it is wrong. It's so hard talking to them. And when I give up trying, they act like they've won the argument, and I'm admitting I was wrong about the fact I told them.
Story 3. Watching a 30-second video on social media and believing it as fact, without doing any other form of fact-checking.
How are you going to call out all of Reddit like this?
It's sad. My dad went from watching the nightly TV news and hourly radio news to getting his news from TikTok and YouTube.
That's not an aspect of being uneducated. It's a combination of confirmation bias and being gullible. It requires metacognition, being aware of your own bias, and the application of skepticism to avoid.
Story 4. That's just how I was raised. Okay, and you're supposed to keep growing and learning as a person, even after you are physically an adult. That includes unlearning things you were raised with that aren't true, don't work, or that we've learned better about.
This reminds me of excusing older people's shitty behavior because they're from a different time. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was talking to a fucking ghost. Because unless they are dead, this is their time and they live in it. Their refusal to accept the world they live in shouldn't become other people's problems.
I hate that different time excuse. My grandfather was born in the 1920s to a well-off family in Poland. They weren't Jewish, but they ended up in a camp nonetheless. Another family member was able to buy his freedom and moved him to the United States, where the military snatched him up for his language abilities. He spent his working years in the military fighting in World War II and the Korean War, and then for the government for the rest. He also had 6 kids, one of whom is gay. For someone with that kind of background, you'd almost expect him to be a typical conservative of that era, but he never loved that son any less, and was one of the most open-minded people I knew. He was from that different time, and still knew how to be a good person.
Muhammad Ali once said something along the lines of, a man who views the world at 50 the same way he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. And the older I get, the more it resonates with me.
Story 5. I don't believe in science. Okay, but you believe in Wi-Fi, GPS, and medicine every day. That contradiction screams uneducated.
Medicine is something you take to cure or alleviate an ailment. People feel or see its effect. Vaccines are to prevent it in the first place, so that they don't see or feel the effect.
Listen, I came here for an argument. Contradiction is not an argument.
Selective belief in science. For example, I don't believe in vaccines because I don't understand how they're made, what goes into them, medical professionals, or vague conspiracy theories. But I do trust mobile phones and software despite not understanding them, etc., etc.
Story 6. The guy I saw during the pandemic talking on his iPhone about how the COVID-19 vaccine contained a tiny microchip that allowed you to be tracked. It was his obliviousness to his iPhone tracking him that really got me. Chuckles.
One of my partners has 2 chips implanted under his skin, fully programmable. He loved fooling those people with them. Chuckles. He has one with his passwords on it, the other to open RFID locks and clock in at work.
I once had a 50-year-old white guy scream that he didn't want Dollar General storing the information from his ID, which I had to scan, just to let him buy a case of White Claw at 9 a.m. Chuckles, we were in a Family Dollar.
I live in downtown Ottawa, and after one of the protests in the summer of 2021, someone was walking down our street yelling crap about the government while pumping a sign about vaccine chips tracking you, and she was wearing a Fitbit.
Story 7. Being proud and unwilling to change one's views, even when faced with contrary evidence.
Nowadays, they'll just downvote without comment.
Story 8. I don't know, but it wasn't until high school that I learned the T in Home Depot was silent. Story 9. People who believe that the possibility of their child catching autism from a vaccine is worse than the chance of them dying from a deadly disease. Like, regardless of the fact that vaccines don't cause autism, but how that's somehow worse than the alternative. Story 10. Where I live in Japan, there's a general lack of English, even though it's taught quite extensively in schools, and extreme ignorance about the outside world. Like believing Japan is unique for having 4 seasons. Story 11. Using the wrong your or your, there, or two. I understand that English is not everyone's native language, but this is not directed at people who fall into that category.
I understand that English is not everyone's native language. Non-natives do it the correct way more often than natives, from my experience, because we properly learned all those phrases.
Right. It's wild to see people not comprehending the meaning of the words. Like, hey, which one makes sense? Should've or should have? They literally don't know. And it blows my mind they can say something without knowing what they're saying. Like, how?
The opposite, too. I've had people correct this in person because they learned it on the internet and can't hear the difference in should've.
Story 12. When people have terrible grammar. I can understand spelling, especially in English, because it's a hard language made up of several other language stems. However, commas and periods are a second-grade skill. Capitalization is a first-grade skill. Paragraphs are a fourth-grade skill. Use what you inevitably ignored in elementary school.
What I have noticed over the decades is that those who speak English as a second language rarely misspell words. It's us native speakers who are the worst offenders.
Especially English, because it's a hard language. A second grade. Fourth grade.
Story 13. A severe lack of context and nuance in their thinking. Also, people who strike you with whataboutisms every time you mention a simple fact. Story 14. In my experience, there is a marked difference in how people navigate social boundaries based on their background. While the uneducated often speak without a filter, sometimes causing unintended harm through bluntness, the educated are conditioned by social structures from interacting with people of different cultures during education. However, this restraint shouldn't be mistaken for genuine empathy. Often, education simply provides the tools to mask a lack of it behind a veneer of politeness.
Yeah, I can recall being in situations where Person A communicates something in a really blunt, impolite way. Person B predictably responds negatively. And after the interaction is over, Person A is confused about why Person B reacted the way they did. People often don't even realize how harsh and ineffective their communication style is, despite it causing them a lot of problems.
Courtesy is a learned response used to buffer confrontation. Entitled people recognize no boundaries or even the presence of another ego.
Story 15. Being so dedicated to a political figure despite their many heinous faults, and they don't even get paid for it. Story 16. Forcing your own beliefs onto others, like a child who cannot accept someone else's point of view, right or wrong it may be. Story 17. Bigotry of any kind. You have to be a certain kind of idiot to believe that some groups of people have a monopoly on certain human traits. We all bleed red. Story 18. Accepting propaganda from one side of an issue and not bothering to investigate or even listen to the other side. Story 19. That's just how I am. Okay, well, who you are is a terrible person, and you should change for the better. Story 20. Flag tattoos. I've yet to meet an educated person who also has a national flag tattoo. Story 21. People who say they'll never use algebra outside of school. Many use it without even knowing it. Story 22. Voting for Trump. Trump famously said that he loves the uneducated. How much clearer do you need it to be? Story 23. You do you, mama. Can't trust vaccines. They're full of toxic heavy metals and microchips. Didn't get Braxton Lee vaccinated. Look how good he's doing. Story 24. Avoid getting emotional or reaching for insults in an argument. You can get heated, but stick to facts and not personal attacks. Also, you can understand others' viewpoints or see where they're coming from and still disagree. Story 25. The people who believe studies are facts. There's a reason they get revised every couple of years. And of course there are financial interests. Story 26. Smug, unwarranted arrogance and condescension over a lie they know is wrong. Basically, MAGA, ICE, evangelicals, cults, and so on. Story 27. Redditors saying, "You must be fun at parties," or language evolves when they lose a debate. Story 28. You're making the claim. Now let's see proof to back it up. Them, sounding uneducated. I don't need to show you proof. You can see for yourself what's going on. Story 29. Really bad driving. When a driver speeds up as they approach a red light with multiple cars already stopped. I wonder if they don't understand physics or are so dumb they can't think 5 seconds ahead. Story 30. When someone's reaction to something they don't understand is anger and intolerance. A smart or educated person will be curious and try to learn more before forming too strong an opinion. A dumb or uneducated person will choose ignorance for their comfort. Story 31. People who just aren't into politics. And in the same vein, people who don't bother voting. Story 32. People who parrot the usual talking points in conversations that aren't even about that. But they've got nothing else. Story 33. People who use religion as a response to everything and anything. I quickly identify these people as very stupid almost immediately. Story 34. Being unable to accept new information. My all-time favorite example. I was in the grade school to middle school range when Pluto stopped being a planet. I remember a lot of the adults were genuinely butthurt about it. People get attached to information they've internalized, and it blocks them from growth.
Great answer. Bad example. It works better for actual facts and information, not taxonomies. To stick with space, we've discovered that the moon is not actually made of cheese. Versus, we've discovered nothing new, but we call it Big Bright Night Ball now.
Story 35. Climate change denial. Prove to me that you only think you know how science works. Story 36. Puzzled when a presidential candidate tells an audience that he will impose tariffs on most things they buy, and they cheer. Story 37. Some guy auditioning for a role where the script says, John Doe, screaming, uneducated. Story 38. Still supporting Trump, arguably supporting him in the first place, but inarguable if you still do. Story 39. Bad grammar. To me, it's an indicator that they don't read and have spent very little time around people who modeled proper speech. They probably weren't readers either. Story 40. Mispronouncing words drives me up a fucking wall. Saying ask as AKS, frustrated as frustrated, and ant as ant like the insect. Story 41. When you can't name the nation's capital, when you have no idea how infrastructure works, when you can't navigate without internet. Story 42. Screaming loudly and throwing tantrums. You're a grown adult. Every difference of opinion or minor inconvenience shouldn't result in a full meltdown. Story 43. Throwing lit cigarettes into the woods and spitting while walking in a major city center. Story 44. Thoughtful people who have that very strong school is useless and school didn't teach us anything useful mentality. Story 45. I'm not reading all that. They don't like being corrected or given information when they're literally very wrong or saying something incorrectly. They get more offended that you know better than to take in proper information and be informed. Saying, I don't read, or reading is whack or lame. Story 46. Why didn't they teach us useful stuff at school, like how to start a business or do taxes? Because you fucked around in class anyway. You think you would have paid attention to a tax class? Story 47. They didn't like dogs. Not allergic, just didn't like them. Absolutely not. Non negotiable. Sorry. Story 48. Grammar. I seen it. We done that. There ain't none. Seen oversaw hits me the hardest. Story 49. Not being able to read. Assuming the person has no learning disabilities, so many people I've encountered, even those who graduated high school, struggle to read. You can really tell when they have to read something out loud. It's fucking painful watching people struggle with basic words and pronunciations. It's literally the most basic skill that anyone without a learning disability can easily master. And a lot of these people are in management positions and can barely read. Story 50. Not being able to have a discussion about politics with someone who has a different opinion without resorting to personal insults. Story 51. When you see someone who can't name the state that's directly north or south of them. Story 52. Basing everything on how things were done or thought of decades ago. Things change over time. How things evolve are understood with new research and how things are perceived, for example, basic human rights. This is why we need younger people in government. With everyone being 60 or older, the mindset is trapped in an old way of thinking and doesn't have much wiggle room to grow, usually because of ignorance, stubbornness, or bigotry. Story 53. Watching videos or music at full volume in public spaces for extended periods of time. It shows they were never taught to consider other people's needs, comforts, or rights. Story 54. Anti-vax, healing crystals, homeschooling for a bullshit reason like protecting them from the world. Story 55. Whataboutisms. It just means that the person had no ability to understand nuance. Story 56. People who use their parents' thought processes as justification for their own. It's okay to believe in the same thing your parent does, but not everyone's parents are geniuses. Think for yourself. Story 57. Sheer lack of curiosity. I have noticed that uneducated people just aren't curious about anything. Story 58. Liberals. College students attacking conservatives just for existing. Septum-piercing bulls violently attacking anyone with a red hat. You can almost see the cartoonish smoke and wind blowing from their noses as they charge, flip tables, and steal people's property. Obnoxiously colored, dyed hair. Non-stop whistleblowing. Being asked a question and screaming and attacking the person because you have no rebuttal. Story 59. Stereotyping. Pretending that all of any given population is fill in the blank, despite not even knowing them. Story 60. Typically, when a North American believes the information they've learned since childhood is globally correct. What you learn in places like the US and what is actually accurate global history are two different things. But you typically can't even have that conversation with someone in the US because they've been indoctrinated since birth. So instead of them viewing accurate information and informing themselves better, they just gaslight you in order to defend their incompetence. It's wild. Story 61. Rolling coal in a diesel truck. Or, really, any kind of asshole look at me driving and or vehicle combination. Story 62. They project their police views. I subscribe to X thinking because everyone who is smart does, without realizing what they're doing. Call it sidecar ing intellectuals. Story 63. When we first met my daughter's first fiancé, I asked where he went to school. He said he went to college for only 1 year because they didn't have anything to teach him. She did marry him but got divorced in a year. Story 64. Blindly believing and voting for or donating. Whenever any politician says, I am doing this for the people, and applauding him or her as if it helps them breathe, without bothering to find the real facts. Story 65. Recently, I was traveling by train, and one decent-looking guy sitting in front of me was constantly spitting out the window of the moving train. I was so pissed because of that. Story 66. I noticed that when there are no books visible in their house, this is common in a high percentage of TikTok-style videos where people are filming at home.
To be fair, a lot more people use tablets and ebooks these days.
Story 67. I had an ex-friend who smoked just hours after back surgery. The doctor didn't mention it, so it's fine. So, I guess lack of critical thinking is the answer.
Besides the fact that smoking is bad for you in general, why does surgery make this a problem?
Story 68. I'll leave my wife because she failed to give me a son. It happens every day in my country. Story 69. Racism and sexism. Uneducated men hate being around women who are educated, and it shows. Lots of people I went to high school with who would talk down about immigrants and people of color stopped that after attending college, versus people I know who did not go to college and still believe Mexicans are taking their jobs. By all means, Chad, go work in the fields and groves you want to be in.